Hello, welcome to today's Facebook LinkedIn Live. I'm chatting today with Sophie Bridgerton, and we're going to be talking all about how you can navigate trauma in the workplace. I know that Sophie is a trauma-informed expert. She's suffered from trauma herself in the workplace, and now she tries to help others that have also suffered from trauma at work to gain clarity and to be able to move forward after that event. Thank you so much, Sophie, for joining me today. It's such a pleasure to chat with you.
Oh, Liz,
as always, and I know you always provide loads of brilliant tips and advice. And people, as you're watching this, please do let us know if you've experienced trauma, whether now or if you want to message us privately, that is absolutely fine as well. So it's obviously something that a lot of people suffer from at work. So maybe, because we were just chatting before we went live, what is the definition of trauma?
What workplace trauma?
Yeah.
Well, I guess, what falls under workplace trauma are, it can be called, there can be lots of names for it, but one of the key sort of words is vicarious trauma. So under vicarious trauma, you get the sort of spectrum of responses after perhaps you've been exposed to situations where there've been, traumatic events. So perhaps we were talking about you are a first responder, or you're a nurse, or you are dealing with some sort of situation where you witness, or you were part of a situation where you need to help people in a traumatic situation. Or you could actually be working with trauma survivors. So, this could be anyone from children with ACEs, so your adverse childhood experiences, through to perhaps, I'm coaching somebody at the moment who is a secretary, and she is part of a preventative health department, and they have really difficult family cases. And she hears those cases, and that impacts how she feels. So there's this spectrum of responses and symptoms that come from it. And I guess there's some predispositions as well that an individual sort of developing vicarious trauma, so exposure to or working with. And those can be things like historic trauma themselves, and then they're in situations which trigger stuff and remind them of old stuff that they haven't dealt with. It could be, that they haven't, that we never get taught. We never got taught the coping strategies.
And I'm just thinking, the people that have to review the videos, that people upload on like Facebook and TikTok, and then if they get flagged, and there's some really extreme, horrible stuff that they would
absolutely
have to do.
And I think that's where that sort of word trauma dumping comes from as well. Somebody might send something in which actually, is inappropriate. Lawyers have to deal with, migrants. They might be family lawyers, and come across cases which really upset them, or sort of grind them down over a period of time. Journalists, that have to report on certain things. So there's that, and then there's the environment that we're in. So it's great that we're starting to talk about trauma, but other things that can exacerbate it is an environment that is non-supportive, that is perhaps hyper-masculine, like the one that I was in, where you don't do emotion, you shut it down, and stoicness is seen as strength rather than vulnerability. And I know things are getting better in organizations, with policies that are supporting people who, and encouraging people who are struggling to say something. But underneath that doesn't change the culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't feel comfortable in that culture to say, look, I'm really struggling, then what are you going to do? You're just going to keep going on.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've sort of got unsupportive leadership, potentially, who might sort of say, you're not coping, you're struggling, the pressure is there, they're looking at you, they're not particularly empathetic or emotionally intelligent. And then obviously you've got your own personal sort of story that comes into work, because although they say, you know, bring your whole self to work, well, you know, it's questionable, but we can't, you know, compartmentalize. Yeah, sometimes big things happen to us personally that also impact. And when you've got that and you've got a draining sort of workplace, or you're dealing with different difficult cases or exposure, you know, that also adds to draining and this lack of bandwidth.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I speak quite openly that I had suffered from infertility, and then somebody I knew suffered from infertility and then was a midwife. I thought, how do you go into work? And in the end, she left because she found it too traumatic.
Yeah,
to go into work, not being able to have her own children and helping deliver other people. So
yeah. And she listened to herself, which is great. I've got a good friend in America who was a paramedic and sort of out on that front line. And she was dealing with really difficult cases where there were a lot of homeless people that perhaps had killed themselves, etc. And she was getting flashbacks. And that was a real sign that actually over a period of time, there was cumulative traumatic experiences that were really affecting her, and she was in tears and she couldn't sleep and she didn't know what to do about it. So we talked about ways that I found that helped myself. But I'm hoping by talking about this that people start to realize, hang on a minute, I could be a coach, I could be a psychologist, and I could be dealing, you know, I could be working with people every day, and I don't understand why I'm getting exhausted. And it might look like burnout, but there might be other things, you know, that are happening at those rooms.
That's interesting, because there's another lady I know, it's still related to babies, but she suffered from baby loss and has become quite prolific on Instagram. And then she gets messages a lot from people that have suffered from baby loss, and she was like, I was even getting them on Christmas Eve, and that was something then that was traumatic to her, to getting these messages. In fact, she found it quite triggering.
Yeah, because I guess she's talking about her experience. Was she trained as a psychologist? Yeah, but then suddenly, because she's speaking up about it, yeah, she's got this flood of people who are like, oh, somebody that hears me and understands me.
It's that setting those boundaries. Jodine has said, leaning into our feminine energy brings a multitude of benefits. It allows us to tap into our intuition, nurturing qualities, and emotional intelligence, fostering more authentic and empathetic connections with others, encourages collaboration, effective communication, and an holistic approach to problem solving, enhancing our leadership skills. In embracing our feminine energy also promotes a healthy work-life balance, reducing stress and burnout while empowering others to express our uniqueness.
Oh my God, I couldn't agree more. And I was thinking about this, you know, the other day, you know, and how, because of what I went through out in Afghanistan, although absolutely horrendous, what it did is bring up this well of emotion that perhaps I've been conditioned to suppress, that I'd masked, you know, and that wasn't my true authentic self. And embracing and working through that, what I've found is I've redesigned my life. And I couldn't have done that without having that emotion. That emotion has made me a wholer person, a much more confident person, a much more creative person, and much more me, you know. And, you know, whereas I would think I was living out only a part of what I thought I should be, you know, to get up the ladder in the army, to get to the place that I was supposed to be, but that wasn't truly who I was. So I was living a half life. So I'm actually grateful for what happened.
Yeah.
I agree more.
Absolutely. So I've given you a couple of examples, like the midwife that quit, and then the lady on Instagram. So I guess, you know, you can have workplace trauma in all sorts of, you know, whatever you do, it can creep in, I guess. So how would you recommend people deal with it? I mean, is there different coping strategies depending upon the grade that you feel you're suffering from?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I first sort of looked at myself And I encourage people to look at themselves. And it is one of the key things. There are lots of apps out there. There is AI that's developed now, you know, to respond to people. And my fear around that is not everybody is a one size fits all. And I know that they respond to you, but you're talking to a bot, you know, and we know ourselves best. And, you know, my journey was a long one out of it because I had no clue what I was suffering from in terms of trauma or the interventions, but it was rich in exploration. And I learned things that worked for me and things that didn't. So, for example, at the stage, you know, that I was in my, you know, injury, traumatic injury, because it was 4 years before I even self-diagnosed and understood that I had trauma, it was well embedded. And I was very dysregulated. So when I was going to a coach or a psychologist and they were encouraging me, I'm doing myself a disservice because I'm a trauma-informed coach here, but it's so important, you know, that if somebody is that down the line ethically, you know, these people need clinical support. Because I didn't understand why when I was talking to somebody, I was getting more and more dysregulated. I would come back. I was talking about things and reliving things. And so my sleep would be worse. I would have worse flashbacks. My chronic anxiety was flaring. My moods were up and down. And it's because when you are talking, you're further embedding, you're reliving, you're creating that stress response. You know, it's not subsiding. So what I worked out very late was, number one, if anyone is getting to this point where they are, perhaps having, I can't think of the terminology. You know, you might have a panic attack or something like that. And so actually it's starting to really affect your everyday life. Then it's your regulation and your central nervous system that needs to be calmed down. Great stuff to help you if you notice you're going down a track and you're slipping down is definitely things that we already know. Mindfulness, breath work, yoga, they all are there to help you calm down your central nervous system. But if you are ruminating and that you have the flashbacks like my friend the paramedic, then or you're perhaps on hypervigilance, and by that I mean, you know, you are so aware and paranoid about your environment around you, and you try to control it to keep yourself regulated and stop yourself from being triggered. If you're there, then you absolutely need something stronger than that, some sort of intervention. And I go back to that neurofeedback, but that really does calm down your central nervous system. But we just don't all have the money. So I would say if you don't have the money, then it is that mindfulness or breath work and getting into your body. And the other thing I've noticed, Liz, is that people are really good. They have the knowledge. They know, you know, about the psychology, their beliefs, what's going on for them. They have that in their head. Well, but what I've really noticed is they're not so great about just getting in their body and being comfortable with their emotions and sitting with it. And we do all sorts of funny things and strategies we play to get ourselves away from feeling like busyness. You know, it is a classic one. Busy, busy, busy. Then I don't really have to feel, you know, that kind of, I find emotions really, really heavy. Well, of course you do, because if you're not used to sitting with difficult emotions, then actually it's never going to be comfortable. So that's one of the first practices I do, is try to just get people into their bodies more and get them really understanding, you know, what's their body telling them, what are these feelings, and what could they do with it themselves, because they have strategies, they come up with stuff.
Interesting. We've had a few comments. Mayuri says that she finds it interesting that feminine energy is the thing that the corporate world often asks us women to hide.
Absolutely. And it's the values, you know, to get up that ladder, what are the strengths that are valued that are going to push you up that hierarchical ladder in the organization? Do they report on you because, you're a creative person, etc., or is it, you're goal oriented, you get the job done, you're assertive, you're this, that, and the other,
Yeah. Interesting. Ronnie has said code switching, gaslighting, manipulation, lack of support and rejection can all cause trauma in the workplace.
Absolutely. And if I think back to my traumatic experience when I was attached to the infantry battalion, and I was the only female in that 800 guys, and the bullying was, part of it was covert, but it was definitely emotional. I was out in a war zone. I was on my own. There was no one else from my kind of grouping, as I'd call it in the army, out there. And, they made it very clear that I wasn't, they didn't want me there, and I was a female and wasn't valued. And so it was ostracization, and that's really, really hard. And it's amazing the kind of, I'll be honest, the survival behaviors that come into play when actually you have to survive.
Yeah.
You're not yourself. I was more of a people pleaser. I didn't call stuff out straight away because I just wanted to belong and I wasn't feeling safe.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, in your experience, are companies getting better at supporting their employees' mental health?
I think that's a carte blanche, isn't it, for everyone? I have some organizations that I've talked to who are really embracing of what I'm doing. And then I have some companies that I've talked to that go, oh, trauma isn't an issue in our organization. And if it is an issue, they take it to a third party. And I'm like, we need to be preempting this stuff. The culture of an organization has a whole mix of stuff, and we all have personal traumas as well, and when we push it to a third party, it's almost like we don't want to face it. And when we don't want to face it, we don't want to talk about it. And then when we don't want to talk about it, we're not embracing it in our culture. And if we're not embracing it in our culture, how can people be comfortable to talk about it?
Mm-hmm. Well, give us some examples then of companies that are doing things right that you see and think, they are really supporting their employees' mental health and what they do.
I think, the ones that I think that are the ones that I've been talking about that are in the business of, their employees actually having to deal with traumatic situations. So that is like the police. I've seen some charities that have to deal with migrants. They're also, putting people on courses to become more trauma informed. Then you've got the NHS, that are more aware. So those are the kind of organisations. But it is
about like you use the term legal, a lawyer that might be reviewing difficult cases. How would a law firm, do you think, support a lawyer that was reviewing those difficult cases? What would you, if there's not a law firm that's doing it at the moment, what would you like to see that law firm doing?
Education, I think, is one of the key things to raise awareness, to have the conversations, to say, hey, there's no shame. It can happen here. And actually, there are certain sectors of our organization where people might be exposed to this, and actually let's make sure that there are the interventions or the support in place early, and that it's not seen as something that's, marginalized, put to the back, or it's just not something that happens here, So, I think it is talking about it, and then perhaps having some ambassadors that actually embrace, that are safe people, because I think part of what I've said before is you can have all the policies in place, but it is the culture, and that can actually exacerbate somebody's traumatic experience or minimize it, how it's dealt with. And I think you've talked before, Liz, about, sort of friends not being sort of supported. I'm sure you have. There's been some examples before. So actually having ambassadors that are supportive of it, and are safe spaces, safe people to talk to.
Yeah. Jodine, because you just mentioned about the culture, she said her company caused her major trauma in a male-dominated environment. She embarked on a 2-year legal battle, which further impacted on the trauma. She won a 7-figure settlement, all orchestrated by men, sexual discrimination. We have a big problem in corporate. She said education, 100%, raising awareness, communication, calling things out, speaking up.
Yeah, and I don't think I would have spoken up if I hadn't gone through the traumatic event and embraced the emotion. It's given me a power, I think, to go, it absolutely shouldn't happen for our younger generation. I would hate anybody to go through. So yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think, as my experience in a sort of very male-dominated environment, there are some good guys in there. It's not all bad, right? But the moral compass and the culture can go really skewed because the policies, the decisions are all made by men. And actually, we are that minority. And what I noticed is when we are that minority, we end up doing different things. We might suppress that feminine energy to get ahead and belong. We might look the opposite way. We might become one of the boys. But I know from myself, and I can't speak for anyone else, I was not authentic. And I absolutely believe there is a place, for all of us. And you'd like to think that we have this inclusive environment and diversity, but I wonder in some cultures still.
Yeah, interesting. And it's interesting what Jodine said about how the trauma was sort of made worse going through that legal battle.
Oh, absolutely. Because I can imagine how, if you've had a traumatic event, that has caused a wound to begin with, and then you actually have a traumatic, stressful situation where you're fighting on top of that, my goodness, it would exasperate things. And especially if you're not being seen and heard, and ultimately, internally, there must have been such a moral fight. This is not right, in the way that I've been treated. It's a bit like moral injury. It goes against what you stand for, your core values, and how you've been treated and dealt with outside is different to that. And it's that kind of dissonance, and that can further exasperate the trauma for sure. So well done if you've got through that. I don't know the outcome, but whoever that was, yeah.
She won a 7-figure settlement, so
brilliant.
Amazing.
Brilliant.
I mean, it's interesting because I know we're talking about whatever, like when you read about like rape conviction rates are so low, and a lot of people can't see it through because it is so traumatic to relive it again.
Yeah, and I had to get to a point. I worked on myself so much I had a lot of anger because the army sent me off to Afghanistan, treated me like some object. They couldn't care, that number. The system was ill-equipped to support me. Leadership looked the opposite way, and there was no treatment, and I lost my career. I was so full of resentment. So I had to kind of work through and process all that to get to a point where I felt really, really strong, but I didn't want to leave it there. I went back to the army and I've called them out and I've spoken out on a podcast and I've sent it to as many people as I could.
Was that my podcast? You spoke out on my podcast, or was it another one?
Yeah, this is another one. And I sent it to all sorts of people in the army, and I'm not going to stop because what happened to me, you think sometimes when it happens to you that you are alone. But there are lots of other people that experience it, but they're just so frightened to speak out. And, we need to, that's why I guess I've done it, to, I hope, pave the way for other people in the military,
Absolutely. Someone said it's the sense of injustice and it's so hard to articulate. Mayuri said that because sometimes it's embedded emotion.
Yeah, that sense of injustice, absolutely. And I guess the danger as well that we can stay there. Another thing that I felt bitterness starting to take over me, and I knew that was not something that I wanted to keep, and I wanted to do something good with it. And there is positive on the other side, but you have to fight through it. Yeah.
So if someone's watching this and they feel that they are suffering from trauma at work, you know, talk through some of the steps that they can do, and then potentially how you can support them as well.
Listen to yourself, I think, first of all. You know, don't bury. Don't, you know, I guess the danger is that we try to think everything's all right and hope things will go away and suppress. Well, the only person you're hurting is yourself, because, you know, that emotion and that energy and that hurt has to go somewhere. And when it goes into your body and it doesn't come out, you know, that's going to come out in all sorts of dis-ease, or, you know, it's going to hurt you. So I'd say, listen, you know, think about what works for you to maybe sit with the emotion and find out ways to process. You can reach out to somebody like me and I'd be happy to work through with you. But also, you know, are there allies within work that you can turn to? Because that environment, if it is in the workplace, is absolutely not healthy, you know. And how long do you sustain that? How long do you look the opposite way? You know, and do you really want to be in that kind of environment? So for me, when it came up, I was like, no, I'm a female in the military. I'm going to fight and I'm going to get my way through. But it nearly killed me. Yeah. Look at your values. Do you value you being in that position in that workplace at the detriment of your health? And I know for me, because it nearly killed me, that actually I will always put my health first. That's my number one value. And no job, no being that, you know, female that gets to the top is worth my health and life ultimately at the end of the day. And then, you know, look at some of the interventions that might help. So, for example, if it's low-level burnout, what can you do to reduce that? Is it workload? You know, is it stepping away from the workplace and detaching a little bit more? Or is it actually, you know, you are having problems with sleeping, you are ruminating more? And then thinking about some of the other interventions that I've mentioned, that like the helping yourself, like the meditation, the yoga, and then the neurofeedback, you know, to calm that central nervous system if it's getting really embedded.
Yeah. And then obviously people can work with you as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Love it.
Yeah. Brilliant. So how can people find you, connect with you, learn more about you and what you offer?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. Obviously, you've got my name there on the screen. And then you can also find me on my website, so www.beyourbest.org.uk. There is a podcast that I've done with MQ. If you type in my name, you will find that. And there's some, you know, other podcasts where we've talked about post-traumatic growth. Yeah, and sort of other aspects of bullying that, you know, bits of my journey that you can find as well. And I'm a bit rubbish on social media at the moment. I'm sorry. I'm getting there.
Mayuri said, I now will always take action when my mental health suffers because of work. Having been through it, it's so hard to see what it's doing to you. So listen to people around you too.
Lovely. Yeah. Thank you, audience, for your questions and for your experience. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sophie. Thank you so much to everyone that's watched and commented. And obviously, if you have anything you want to private message Sophie or me, you are more than welcome. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
See you soon.